Cristo può dare la vita, io la darò per te. Quanto è buono, quanto è bello, che viviamo da fratelli, contemplarne il tuo sorriso, che Cristo vive in te. Quanto è buono, quanto è bello, che viviamo da fratelli, contemplarne il tuo sorriso, che Cristo vive in noi.
Sonido, sonido.
Podemos volver. We can come back. Possiamo tornare pian piano, rientriamo nell'aula, prendiamo i nostri posti, podemos volver, sentarnos nuevamente en nuestros lugares. We can come back and take our places, our seats. Welcome back. Podemos voltar, vamos lentamente tomando os nossos lugares.
And we're coming back from the break at this 10th World Meeting of Families. This is the second part of the morning conference. The second panel will be focused on young people and the elderly together for the Church of Tomorrow. And we see Miss Gabriela Gambino is the lady in blue on the left, that you can see if you're watching from TV. I failed to mention earlier that the priest who has also been speaking this morning is Father Alexandre Awi Melo. He is the secretary of the Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life, and he plays a prominent role in preparing this event. The panelists this morning include a couple from Italy, a couple from Spain, a man from the United States of America, and another couple from Italy. They are all taking part and seated up there on the stage. As you're following this event, you can, besides following online and live, we are also offering a running commentary, live tweeting of the event and various important quotes from this World Meeting of Families on our Twitter account, which the handle is @Vatican News. And there you can find various pictures and interventions, quotes from interventions from these, from the speakers throughout this 3-day event. You can also go to our website at vaticannews.va, and there you'll find coverage and interviews with the participants in the event. Our main source of background for this World Meeting of Families was the Dicastery for Relative and Family and Life released just a few days ago, last week I believe, released a set of guidelines that to help accompany engaged couples toward marriage and to just in general to guide the church's accompaniment of families, young families, but also families who encounter crisis and moments of difficulty. And it's entitled The Catechumenal Itineraries for Married Life. And this document kind of forms the background for a lot of the text and the interventions and speeches and themes that are chosen for this World Meeting of Families as a way to renew the Church's pastoral care of families, and as accompanying is the probably the key word that covers this part of the Church's life, to accompany families, accompany them, walk with them along their journey. And we've heard from the speakers this morning that the Church and those who have spoken have been mostly family ministers, people who minister to families in their own local parishes and churches, offering assistance in times of crisis, but also in times of joy, and just a place where the families can feel at home in the Church and be part of the Church. The first speech was by Gregory and Lisa Popcak, and they offered an theological background for how the Church is meant to be composed of a unit composed of families, of smaller units, and that each family is a domestic church, a small church in which the Church is present, in which Christ is present in the relationship among family members. And we see Ms. Gambino coming up toward the podium to greet us and begin the second panel. As I was saying, the catechumenal itineraries for married life are
Okay, so please be seated so that we can resume our proceedings.
Okay. Ricominciamo. Se potete prendere posto, per favore. Ok. Allora, incominciamo
Let us begin
con il secondo panel
with our second panel
del nostro congresso.
of our Congress.
Vi presento
I would like
i
to introduce to
moderatori
you the
di questa-
moderators
di questo secondo panel,
for this second
i
panel.
coniugi Adriana Bizzarri,
Adriana
e
Bizzarri
Giustino Trincia.
and her husband Giustino Trincia.
Sono sposati da 41
They've
anni.
been married for 41
Hanno
years.
2 figlie
They have
e
2
2
daughters
nipoti.
and 2 grandchildren.
Vivono e lavorano a
They
Roma.
live and work in Rome. Adriana
coordina il
is the
settore
coordinator
scuola
of the school
dell'Associazione
sector
Cittadinanza
of
Attiva.
the Active Citizenship
ambito
Association.
ecclesiale,
Insofar as
si
the
occupa
church
di
is concerned,
consulenza familiare
she's
e
a
della
family
mensa dei
consultant,
poveri della
and
parrocchia.
also she runs the soup kitchen in her parish.
è
Giustino
diacono permanente
is a permanent deacon
della diocesi di Roma,
of the Diocese of Rome.
direttore della
He
Caritas
is
Roma.
director of Caritas here in Rome,
Insieme sono
and together
impegnati
they
nell'ambito
are
dell'evangelizzazione e
committed
della carità
in the
e
domain
in
of
particolare
evangelization
sono
and charity
membri
works,
delle
and they're
cellule
members of
parrocchiali
the
di evangelizzazione.
evangelization
Lascio a loro la
cells
parola.
of their parish. So I would like to give them the floor.
Benvenuti ai lavori di questo
And
secondo
I would like to welcome you all to the second panel dedicated to young people and old people together for the Church of Tomorrow. We will be discussing 3 topics in the next hour, thanks to the testimonies and reflections that will be shared by our speakers today. The fundamental role played by grandparents, both within and outside the family, number 1. Second topic, the role of young people and grandparents along the synodal path with respect to intergenerational dialogue. The third topic will refer to the role of grandparents and the elderly in the pastoral care activity of the church. So the task of proclaiming the gospel at any age. There's no retirement age in this case. Let us begin with our speakers, our 5 speakers. It is really a source of great joy having them here with us. Well, their bios are very enriching, so please, you can read through their details on the website of the World Meeting of Families. Let us begin with our first 2 speakers, Álvaro Medina del Campo and Maria Rosario Garcia Garoz. They've been married for 50 years, and best wishes, by the way. And they have 2 children, Eva and Alvaro. Yes, a big hand, well-deserved, indeed. And their parents to Eva and Alvaro, and they have 8 grandchildren, and they have great-grandchildren. They hail from Madrid, and they both work in the movement for the elderly Vita Ascendente, and each speaker will have 15 minutes, and of course we want to stay friends with the other speakers without the ungrateful task we have to remind you before 2 minutes before your time is up. We will have to signal that to you, so I hope that you will not be offended by this. And now we have Álvaro Medina del Campo and Maria Rosario Garcia Garoz, and they will talk about the role of grandparents.
Buenos días a todos. Queremos hablar
Good morning to you all.
de la transmisión de la fe en la familia.
We will talk about the transmission of the faith in the family. Many of us are concerned when some of our children or grandchildren do not follow the path that the church points to, despite our life testimony and our advice. And we would like to share with you 2 stories that have occurred in our family that help us to then continue in our mission, which is testifying to our faith. Even if some of our descendants did not follow in our footsteps. And the first story is the story of a man, a story which I hope might be useful to you as a reference to understand the importance of steadfastness. This man, the main character of our story, was born in Madrid, February 1921. He was the youngest of 5 brothers. He was born in a humble family in the Tetuan neighborhood, and his family was atheist. When the war broke out, our leading man in our story was a teenager, and like most teenagers, he was restless and revolutionary. And he dedicated, let's say, the time of our civil war, persecuting Christians and attacking churches. After the war, he continued with his anti-clerical activities. He did not relent in any way. He was actually arrested. He was tried and sentenced to 6 years in jail. When he served his sentence, he met Maria, a woman who was 10 years older than he was. They fell in love, they got married, and at that time, Maria was 36 years old. They wanted to have children, and Maria got pregnant immediately, but unfortunately, she miscarried. She got pregnant again, and she miscarried for a second time. During her 3rd pregnancy, it seemed that everything would go well, but the baby died during childbirth. They started to fear that they could not have children because Maria was already almost 40 years old, and back in the day it was quite an advanced age to have children. But again she got pregnant, and at long last a son was born. Immense joy, but it was short-lived, because after 6 months the baby fell ill with pneumonia. He was dying. The doctors could not do anything to save him, and they were just waiting for him to die. And they were both desperate. Their child was dying, and there was nothing they could do. One of their neighbors then suggested to this man, "Why don't you pray? What have you got to lose?" And he said, "I don't know how to pray." But in his desperation, this man decided to go to church. It was late at night, and he thought of going to the church of the hospital of the infant Jesus. There were other churches closer to home, but that's the one that he decided to go to. Who knows? Maybe because it was the church of a hospital, and in his ignorance he linked the fact that, having the hospital and the church next to each other would be conducive to his son's recovery. But when he reached that church, the church was closed. So we have to think about this man crying desperately in front of the closed door of a church, a man who does not know how to pray. Well, in this situation, only God knows why, a priest saw him, approached him, and asked him what was wrong. And that man, sobbing, told him about his tragic story, and ended up by saying, "Here I am, but I don't know how to pray." The priest comforted him and said, "You say you don't know how to pray, but today you have prayed more than I have, so go back home." He went back home on foot because the buses were not running any longer. It was too late at night, so it took him some time to get back home because the church was a few kilometers away from his house. And when he arrived, his wife was sitting with the baby in her arms, and our man could not tell Mary what had happened because she would not listen to him. She did not understand why, but she could see that the child was breathing well, he had no fever. They could not figure out what was happening, but the baby was safe, he was fine. That man immediately realized what happened. The Lord heard his cry for help. His life changed completely. This atheist became a Christian, and this is where his mission of apostolate started. He started telling his friends what had happened, and the result of his first apostolate was that his friends considered him a traitor. And they decided not to speak to him anymore. Everybody around him were hostile, but he kept telling people his story. Even if this apostolate basically was leading to his increasing loneliness, but he could not stop. Without his old friends and without knowing anyone in the church, he continued telling his story to anyone who would be willing to listen. The Lord gave them 2 more children, and as any good Christian family, they educated their children in a Catholic school, and he never stopped working as an apostle. He integrated himself in the church and worked as much as possible. His children grew in a Christian environment. They grew up in a Christian environment. He set an example with his life and was always ready to tell that story that changed his life, but his children did not follow in his footsteps. You see, in spite of all the apostolate that this man had fulfilled, had accomplished, apparently there were no tangible results, but he never stopped testifying to his apostolate with his life, his words, and he died without seeing the fruit of his apostolate in the family. After 40 years, his eldest son, the one who had been cured from the disease, from pneumonia, felt the need to know the truth of life from the point of view of faith. And as if he did not have enough examples with his father's life, he started investigating in different churches. He started talking to people in evangelical churches. He attended meetings of Jehovah's Witnesses. He even went in a mosque and studied the Quran. One morning, he woke up with the profound wish to be at peace with God. He went to a Catholic church. He asked for confession, and there he found God's mercy. And God entered in his life, and he finally realized that the truth of life had already been revealed to him by his father with his story in his life. The eyes of his heart were opened, and he followed in his father's footsteps. In this way, his father was able to say to the Lord, "Look, you gave me 1 talent, here are 2 talents." His apostolate, even if he could not see that, bore fruit. So let us not tire. We should not get tired of engaging in our apostolate, because it is our mission. Only God knows how to make our works fruitful. And therefore, we would be very unfair to our children and grandchildren if we did not bring them the good news that God is here and he loves us. I know this story very well, because the man in the story was my father.
La segunda historia es la de nuestra hija Eva.
The second story is the story of our daughter Eva and our grandson Victor. As we have told you in the beginning, we have 2 children, Eva and Alvaro. Our son has 4 children. He's a good Christian. Actually, we learn so much from him when it comes to being Christians. Eva, instead, she has never followed the path of faith. She has 4 children, 2 girls, Irene and Maria, and 2 boys, Victor and Pablo. Her life went through many changes. When she was 15 years old, she had her first boyfriend, Luis, but then they broke up. When she finished her studies as early childhood educator at the age of 19, she met her second boyfriend, Vicente. She became pregnant with her first daughter, Irene. The relationship with her second boyfriend did not last long. It didn't work. And when Irene was 2 years old, they broke up. Shortly after, she once again resumed her relationship with Luis, her first boyfriend, and after a while they decided to live together. And the result of this relationship was the birth of their second daughter, Maria. Her second daughter, actually, Maria. And the relationship between Eva and Luis was good. They decided to get married, and the third son, Victor, was born. 4 years later, Eva divorced Luis and decided to move to an environmentally friendly or ecological village with an organization called Arco Iris. And this village is located in the mountains in the province of León, in the north of Spain. So Eva, to move there, she left her children behind, her job, her family, and all our efforts to convince her not to leave were to no avail. But at some point, she had to travel back to Madrid to sign the paperwork through which she was given up custody of her children. And while she was in the house where she lived,
intentó suicidarse tomando.
She tried to kill herself by taking a mixture of drugs and medication.
Nosotros estábamos de viaje y recibimos la llamada de nuestro
We were on a trip,
que nos comentó
and we received a call
y que Eva estaba
from our
en un hospital.
father-in-law, who told us what happened, that Eva was in a hospital. We rushed back to Madrid, and thank God the doctors were able to save her. It was then that we learned that our daughter was pregnant with her fourth child.
Cuando salió del hospital, se vino a vivir con nosotros.
When she was dismissed from the hospital, she came to live with us,
Pablo, nuestro octavo nieto,
and Pablo, our
Eva y
eighth
Luis de
grandchild,
nuevo
was born.
retomaron su relación.
Eva and Luis rekindled their relationship, and Eva went back to live in her old house. But after 5 years,
Y Eva, con su
they
pequeño
broke up
Pablo,
again,
volvió
and
a
Eva, with little Pablo, moved back
la aventura en
to
esta
that
ocasión fue más
environmentally
breve.
friendly or eco
A los
village.
2 meses de su marcha,
But the adventure was shorter that time, because 2 months after her departure, she suffered an aneurysm and she was admitted to a hospital in León. During the first 12 days in the hospital,
nos transmitían los médicos
the prognosis was always the same.
en estado crítico.
She was in critical condition. The doctors would always say, they would repeat this all the time. We thought she would die. And we asked the hospital chaplain to give her the anointing of the sick. And we were basically
Roto de dolor y sin
bidding
poder
our
hacer nada
farewell
por ella,
to her, heartbroken and unable to do anything for her, totally helpless.
Señor,
We prayed to the Lord.
sino por su salvación.
We did not pray the Lord to
Le pareció
heal
bien
her,
nuestra
but to
súplica al
save
Señor
her.
y la volvió a la vida.
And apparently, our plea seemed good to the Lord. And He brought her back to life, brought her back to us in our arms. And He told us, here she is, and you will accompany her to my house. This is how we understood the mission God has entrusted to us. And the one who had been our martyrdom, basically, is now the center of our mission, so much so that in wanting to take her to the Father's house, she is the one who is taking us to the house of the Father. Her illness has left her with serious after effects, and she now lives with us. Eva had not baptized any of her children. As you can see, our mission of transmitting the faith to our daughter and her children was not really giving any result. But a year before her health issues, Eva surprised us once again, although this time it was in a good way, in a very good way, because she told us that she had enrolled her 2 sons, Victor and Pablo, to a religion class in Sunday school. We do not know what led her to make this decision, but we think that maybe it was because for some time she interacted with a few missionaries of the Verbum Dei to whom we had introduced her. So we have always tried to transmit to our children and grandchildren the faith that we are living, even if the fruits apparently are not the ones that we thought would be forthcoming. But 3 years ago, so 1 year after Eva's health issues, Victor one day told us that he wanted to be baptized. We asked him why, and his answer moved us to tears. He said that he thought that if he was baptized, the Lord would listen better to his prayers for his mom. On May 15, 2021, our grandsons, Victor and Pablo, were baptized. St. Matthew tells us the story of the healing of the paralytic, whose sins Jesus forgives and subsequently heals him, not because of his faith, but because of the faith of those carrying him on the stretcher. Well, if the faith of the stretcher bearers obtain the healing of the paralytic man, how much more will the faith of parents and grandparents who've seen their children and grandchildren who are prostrate on the stretcher of life and have no faith even to feel the need to be saved? Well, this faith will serve for the salvation of their loved ones. The family is a great miracle. It is a secret of love between parents, children, and grandparents. It is that place in which God weaves beautiful stories. Man's life is a space of freedom created by God for man to build a love story. We thank God for this gift of faith, and we will never tire of bearing witness to it, even if it does not seem to achieve the results we were looking for. We place all our hope in the Lord.
Thank you, really thank you to Alvaro and Maria for these touching stories. You spoke about passing on faith in your family, and you said how important it is to persevere in the announcement of the gospel of the faith to children and grandchildren, even if we do not see the fruits. But we know that Christ is doing the good for Justine and Mia. We are grandparents and parents, and we see how difficult it is to pass on faith and this message of faith in the family. We must trust in God and do not count so much on our personal efforts, because it's only God who knows how and when. And we have to accept the fact that perhaps we might not see the fruits of our labor. And now we give the floor to Christopher Bellito, who is going to speak about young, elderly, and the synodal path. He's a professor of history at the Keene University, US, and he's publishing many books with Karen and Grace. Live in New Jersey. You have the floor, Christopher.
Thank you for the invitation to speak today about the reasons why we should pair our elders with young people and about ways that we might do that. I come to you not as a pastoral minister, but as a church historian who spends most of his life in the ancient and medieval worlds and who wondered how past societies treated their elders. Looking for inspiration, I decided to read the Bible. Being Catholic, I had never read the Bible. Start to finish, and note how elders were portrayed across centuries in different genres from multiple perspectives. This resulted in a book, Ageless Wisdom, Lifetime Lessons from the Bible, and I'd like to draw on some of that material today for our work. My goal is that I will provide context and that your own creativity, your experience, and your cultures will produce pastoral impact, as my family has tried to do with our own daughter, Grace, and her grandparents. My parents, Joan and Anthony, my father now gone to God, and my wife Karen's parents, Catherine and Bob. Some stark facts. In my own country, every single day, 10,000 people turn 65. In 2008, 7% of the world's population was over 65. In 2040, 20% of the world's population will be over 65. That's 1 in 5 people on the planet. A statistic that has never before happened in human history. And I don't think we're prepared. What are the implications for health care, for housing, for food, for mental health services, for government aid, and pastoral care, which is our focus today? Let's get out in front of the issue with good advanced planning. Our recent popes have been leading the way. In 1980, John Paul II told the International Forum on Active Aging that older men and women play a role in the continuity of generations by the charism of bridging the gap. Benedict, visiting a London nursing home in 2010, said, quote, "As advances in medicine and other factors lead to increased longevity, it's important to recognize the presence of growing numbers of older people as a blessing for society. Every generation can learn from the experience and wisdom of the generation that preceded it." Indeed, the provision of care for the elderly should be considered not so much as an act of generosity, but as a repayment of a debt of gratitude. Pope Francis has been especially strong. Pope Francis has been especially strong in promoting care for the elderly. If anyone is looking for a topic for a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation, this is a good one. Francis talks about the caring for our elders and connecting them with young people all the time. I direct you to Amoris Laetitia numbers 191 to 93, among any places, where he tells us that our elders are a living part of our community. The phrase reminds me of a phrase from the Akan tribe in Ghana. They call senior citizens living ancestors. A good attitude, living ancestors. So let me direct you to the Bible for good examples of how we treat our elders well and poorly. These might be stories that young and old read together, and I bet that each would be surprised at how differently the story looks to the other. See how the young Elihu waits for Job and his elders to speak before he makes his points. Observe not only how young Ruth refuses to leave her mother-in-law Naomi, but how Naomi helps Ruth make good decisions with the wisdom of her long years. Do the matriarchs, the patriarchs, and the prophets continually tell us to honor our mothers and fathers because we're not and need to be reminded? Can we learn patience, especially about waiting for children and then grandchildren from Sarah and Abraham, Elizabeth and Zechariah? Can our young people understand that wisdom comes from experience by reading about Moses' travails or the stamina of faith presented by the many mothers and grandmothers who stood by Jesus when the men ran away? Let's look at Anna and Simeon. Models of praise and patience. They're prophets, even though we're used to looking at prophets as being young, like Jeremiah. You know the story. It's in Luke 2. We mark as the Feast of the Presentation on February 2nd. Simon is not given an age, but we learn he's a righteous man waiting for his death, which Yahweh said wouldn't come until he laid eyes on the Messiah. Anna is given a very precise age, 84. A holy woman who came to the temple every day, like our own elders who attend daily Mass. Think of it. Old Anna and Simeon are the first people after Mary and Joseph, the shepherds and the Magi, to see Jesus as he truly was and then to proclaim it. Preaching on this feast a few years ago, Pope Francis turned things around. It's a meeting between young people who are full of joy for the action of the Holy Spirit. It's a unique encounter between observance and prophecy, where young people are the observers and the elderly are prophetic. You may have noticed that Francis likes to turn things around. Speaking not long after his election in Brazil at World Youth Day, he said, "The elderly are also the future of a people." Older people are often thought of as an end. They're no longer useful. They can be disposed. Francis says no, and he presents Simeon and Anna as examples. The elderly are also the future of a people. Our elders, Anna and Simeon, teach our young people several spiritual lessons. They teach us to keep praying. They teach us to have faith that God's timing is not our timing. They teach us to have trust, even if God's promise is taking longer than we'd like. Finally, they teach us that when we hear good news, we can't keep it to ourselves, even at the end of their lives. These two prophetic senior citizens were still paying it forward. They biblically bridged the generation gap. We can make that happen in our own communities on special days and every day, any day. Pope Francis has introduced an annual celebration. It's the fourth Sunday in July, the World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly. We don't talk about Jesus having grandparents, do we? But Jesus had grandparents, Joachim and Anna. Talk to your kids about that. But let's not allow one day to do the trick. We don't need an anniversary to tell our spouses we love them. We don't need to wait for Mother's Day to buy flowers. There are plenty of things we can do throughout the year. Francis gives us papal homework. Speaking a few days after his own 80th birthday in 2016, he said to a group of youngsters, speak to your grandparents. Ask them questions. They have the memory of history, the experience of living, and this is a great gift for you that will help you on your journey. Where can this happen? Many places. The first commitment is to make a priority whether you're a grandparent, parent, or younger person. Don't say, I don't have the time. As I tell my university students, if you can't find the time, make the time. Once you've done that, here are just a few ideas. But you, not I, you are the pastoral ministers. Families are separated. Pair up a grandparent without grandchildren nearby in your parish with grandchildren without local grandparents, and then do any of these activities. Set up a movie night. One time the elder chooses, the next the younger, and talk all the way through it. Explain things to each other while the parents maybe get a night out for a date they haven't had in years. Oral interviews. Our seniors will not always be with us. We've heard their stories, but have we preserved them? Have young people documented their elders' experiences by taping so video and audio can last beyond their lifetimes? Start with the funny stories we've all heard. Prompt them to tell the stories they've never told, but time is running out. What was it like when you came to this country, when you dated, when you started school, when something happened to you? What is your greatest regret? Maybe tie this to children's sacramental preparation and life lessons. Grandma, what was your first communion like? Grandpa, did you get confirmed? Tell me about Mommy's baptism. Tell me about mine. Volunteer together. You were a refugee. How can we help refugees today? Ask the tough questions. Did you ever doubt God? Were you afraid you wouldn't get a job? What did you think when your sister got cancer? How did you get through it? Did you ever march for a political or social cause? What happens? Were you scared? What was the cost? What helped you do the hard things? Would you do it again? Make the extraordinary ordinary. Elders aren't quick with tech. Teenagers are. Have the young people help Grandma with her laptop and Zoom. Create mentors and proteges. Pair an experienced retired person with a certain skill with a young person thinking of picking that skill up. It could be anything: plumbing, nursing, social work, electrician, teacher, bus driver, a person starting their own business. And now my favorite: cook together. This is my mother, Joan, and our daughter, Grace, the night before Thanksgiving, where they always make coconut cream pie. Share the family recipes. Write them down, even if you've never done that before, especially if you've never measured. Figure out a handful of this, a pinch of that. And then tell the story that goes with the recipe: a feast, a wedding, a birthday, or no special event at all, but something you just love to make. It might go something like this: when we came to this country, we couldn't find this ingredient, so we substituted that. When we didn't have enough food, we stretched it this way. And then eat together. As often as possible, reclaim the dinner table with no smartphones. Let me conclude. Let me conclude. Just last month, Pope Francis directed our attention to the biblical figure of Judith, who lived to be 105. She spent her older years giving out wisdom, telling stories, passing on the lessons. As St. Francis said, the life of our communities must know how to benefit from the talents and charisms of so many elderly people who are already retired, but who are a wealth to be treasured. A wealth to be treasured. On the part of the elderly themselves, this requires a creative attention, a new intention, a generous availability. The previous skills of active life lose their constraint and become resources to be given away. Teaching, advising, building, caring, listening, preferably in favor of the most disadvantaged, who cannot afford any learning or who are abandoned in their loneliness. I ask our seniors to pay it forward for as long as you can. I ask our youngsters to listen, to learn, and to act in ways that honor our elders. Thank you.
Ringraziamo anche Christopher per questo ricco, per questo prezioso intervento.
Contribution very enriching, where he underlined the reciprocity and the equal dignity that can be established in a relationship between young people and older folks, for the common commitment to grow in life and faith at any age. And we like to mention Amoris Laetitia, Pope Francis, once again, when he said, I would like a church that challenges the culture of the throwaway culture with an overflowing embrace between the elderly and young people. And then Christopher, with several examples taken from the Bible, has provided us with many useful and practical tips that we can draw inspiration from for new pastoral activities that we can introduce in our communities. We identify a lot in many of the things that Christopher said. During the lockdown, during endless Zoom calls with our 7-year-old granddaughter, we wrote a short book of fantastic stories. And when we eat together with our granddaughter, we let her suggest and basically lead in her own way, with her creativity, the prayer or the blessing of the meal. Very well. Let us give the floor now to Vincenzo Bassi and Carla Di Lello for the third and last testimony and lecture of this panel, and the title is The Elderly in the Pastoral Care of the Church. Vincenzo and Carla are Italian. They've been married since 2013, and they have 3 children. They are attorneys, and they worked for the same law firm. Vincenzo is the president of the Federation of Catholic Family Associations in Europe, and both, with different positions of responsibilities, are part of the Union of Italian Catholic Jurists. Thank you for the kind invitation, and thank you for your patience. We hope that this last contribution might be interesting. We promise that we will be brief, and so that we can bring to an end this first morning session in a fruitful way. Our contribution stems from 3 questions. So why? Why is the pastoral care of the elderly essential to the Church? How can we, as families, how can we benefit from the pastoral care for the elderly, being aware that the elderly within the family can play different roles based, of course, on their culture, on their social background, but also their health status. So it's important to understand that the elderly are part of the family, and in the family, each one has a role, a function to play, not based on a template or a stereotype, but just if we think about the examples that we can all give to the other family members. And so the need to have an example from the elderly stems from a need and an analysis that was also mentioned earlier regarding our society. We are going through a period of grace because last year, FACSE, together with the bishops' conferences of the European Union, COMESE, published a reflection paper on the elderly and the future of Europe, with the primary aim of underlying the fact that Europeans are living longer. And this is good news. It's not bad news. Not at all. The real problem, however, is that people are not having enough children. The working age population is dwindling. In 2019, for instance, it was equivalent to 59% of the entire population. By 2070, it is expected to drop to 51%. At that time, the number of children and young people is expected to decline by 12.6 million. So, with all the institutions, whether at national, international, European level, this situation must also be addressed clearly in the Church, in this time that the Holy Spirit is giving to the Church with synodality, in order to rethink about pastoral care, not in a compartmentalized way, but in an integral and cross-sectoral way. Really, there is nothing more integral and cross-sectoral than families, really. The family, so that no one feels excluded, must be at the center of pastoral care. And a very clear example in this is the pastoral care of the elderly. During this health care crisis, we have all experienced our families in an integral way, perhaps even too much so. What was evident, however, was how the distance from one's own family of origin, the elderly in our family, this has been among the greatest causes of suffering for the elderly. In the same way, it is evident that during COVID and also right now, during this time of war, right? Actually, in this time of war, it is precisely the families who are the first to suffer, but also to come to the rescue and to help. They are the natural hubs of all social policies in helping individuals in prevention, emergency and care. Welfare and all welfare measures are but palliatives. Even if they are important, they can never replace the fundamental and natural function of the family and the welcoming attitude that families can ensure. As Pope Francis stated in that extraordinary historic moment of prayer and adoration that was held in empty St. Peter's Square on March 27th, 2020, we realized that we were in the same boat. We are all fragile, and we're all disoriented. But at the same time, we're all important and necessary. We're all called to row together, all in need of comforting each other. We realized that we cannot go forward, each one on our own. We can only move forward together. And the elderly are family cells and also a pastoral care tool. And in the wake of all these experiences, we cannot help but notice that the real disease affecting families is loneliness. As we always say, the family is not a sick person that needs to be cured. It is the cure to the disease. Thus, it is also possible for us to reflect on the meaning of the function of the elderly within the family. In this regard, we should always remember that the elderly should not be seen exclusively as fragile individuals that need to be taken care of or need to be defended. They're also actors, protagonists. Starting with the transmission of faith in families, of our traditions, but also in our association and in our church structures. They cannot be considered as a separate category because they're actually an integral part of the dynamism that leads the church outward, also through intergenerational dialogue. Indeed, the joyful and united family is by its very nature generous, generative, and therefore open, capable of welcoming the elderly. The family is, on the contrary, closed if it is precarious, that is, if experiencing a fracture within itself, it becomes afraid. Therefore, the greatest fear of family is not the stranger, the frail, or the elderly, but, as we have already mentioned, loneliness and hopelessness. In such a difficult situation, the family should welcome and be the natural place for the life of the elderly is fragile, scared, as are the individuals and the families that should be welcomed. Therefore, no pastoral care that wants to enhance the role of the elderly will be truly effective if it does not enhance precisely this attitude of families to be welcoming and also its generativity. In other words, the ultimate goal of a pastoral care that recognizes the irreplaceable role of the elderly must be to bring about a better understanding of the role and function of the family, which, in order to fully achieve its vocation, welcoming and integration, must develop values such as dialogue, self-giving, and mutual help to the fullest. But not only that, precisely the welcoming and integration of others for welcoming families, well, this becomes a lever, an opportunity in order to develop and evangelize their communities, which are in turn networks of families. In fact, the closeness between families and family networks basically is essential for to have a successful integration. Therefore, a correct and balanced pastoral care that recognizes the elderly as having an essential role within the family must have the ambition of making our homes more and more welcoming. And they should be less and less apartments that are far removed from the reality of our communities. And in this regard, as we have already mentioned, and this will well specified in the document dedicated to the elderly and the future of Europe, we need a reversal of perspective, which no longer simply points to the elderly and frail as an object of care, but which sees them as protagonists, first and foremost, in their families, and together with their families, recognizing them as a wealth for the entire community. In this sense, it is essential that a pastoral initiative puts care at the center, that is, relationships and therefore the family as the privileged and natural place where care can be fully experienced. For this to happen, however, families cannot be left alone. They cannot be left alone. They need communities of families, networks of families that know how to create that quality in interpersonal relationships that our grandparents used to experience, our grandparents in their villages. Only together can families truly become generative, open to life, welcoming, and above all, in today's secularized society, Father Oreste Benzi used to say, "We dream of the day when there will be no more old people's homes." God created the family. Men came up with the idea of nursing homes for the elderly. We dream that there will be no more institutions. God created the family. Men created institutions. We dream a world without soup kitchens because our families will be soup kitchens for the poor. Then people will understand that really Christ has come. He is in our midst. When the mentally ill can be cared for in families, then they will finally recognize that Christ is in our midst. Faith is not devotion to be consumed in solitude. It is the disruptive element that creates the new heavens and the new earth. The poor have been chosen by God to test our faith. And the family, let us add, please, in conclusion, is the privileged place for this dynamic of testing.
Grazie molte ai nostri due ultimi relatori, a Carla e a Vincenzo.
We would like to thank Carla and Vincenzo for this reflection that really highlights the urgency for some paradigm shifts that are necessary to rethink pastoral care in an integrated, transversal way. The family not as the sick, but as a solution to the disease of our time. And the prophetic attitude of families to give testimony in this network of families to promote integration and welcoming the other. The family as ambassador of the reaching out church that is continuously prompted by Pope Francis. And the words mentioned by Bensi are really urging us to new, even if traditional solution, that is to say, finding back the central role of senior citizens. As couple, we, in our life since 1998, we have been experiencing what is expressed in the Act of the Apostles. And in fact, we meet in our homes. Also, in our home, once a week, we invite small groups of people with different age groups, different experiences, but different backgrounds, to share what the God does for us and to support mutually in the process of evangelization. We would like to conclude, first of all, thanking God for these testimonies, for the stories, and we thank all of you for your kind attention. I would like to thank all those who are connected via streaming. Thank you, enjoy your meal, and see you later.
Bene. Grazie.
Okay, thank you to all speakers. And before closing for the lunch break, I would like to give you some important housekeeping information. Tonight at 8:30 in the courtyard of the Lateranense Palace, there will be a concert on the joy of music for this 10th World Meeting, organized specially for us. You have the ticket, the weekly ticket, in your rucksack, and you can also take the underground from Ottaviano Station to San Giovanni to go to the Palazzo Lateranense, where the concert will take place. All the conferences and events will be published on the website Rome Family Rome 2022. That will be published in the original language, So once the panel is over, you can immediately find all the speeches on the website. And furthermore, I would like to inform you, first of all, I would like to greet all those who are following us remotely. There are so many, so hello and welcome. And I would like to say that Radio Vaticana, so Vatican Radio, is broadcasting the meeting in 5 languages: Italian, French, Portuguese, English, and German. So that's the end of the morning session. Time for lunch. Before getting out of the Nervi Hall, please leave the simultaneous translation device, but keep the headset. That is personal. So the device should be handed over, but keep the headset. Take the box lunch, but should be eaten out of the Vatican City.
Thank her for
so you should kindly get out of the gate and eat your lunch outside the gate.
We thank Mrs. Gambino for mentioning us here at Vatican Radio, at Vatican Media, for offering this aspect of the live broadcast of the World Meeting of Families in coordination with the Dicastery for Laity, Family and Life. So we thank everyone for joining us for this morning's event. And this has been the first session of the World Meeting of Families. And we will be back again with more live broadcast of the 10th World Meeting.